I think what's important to keep in mind with research like this is it takes a long time. But that's okay. The information is out there. It's a big puzzle. So it takes time to puzzle it all together, and making a mind map or a family tree like I did really helps to see where there are still blank spots, or what kind of information you might want to find out. Hi, my name is Annique, and I'm a trainer and researcher for Bellingcat. And today I'm going to show you how you can find more information about your family and your heritage using open source methods. So, in September last year, I think, me, my brother, and my father were invited to a Air Force base in Breda here in Holland, because apparently my grandfather was still owned some medals. He was rewarded because he didn't fought in World War II, but he was part of the Dutch Indonesian army. And my brother found out that he was rewarded those medals, but he never received them. So then you can fill in a form and formally ask to still, as relatives, get those medals. And we were invited over to an Air Force base in Breda to come and pick them up. But while we were there, my father was telling him a lot about my grandfather and how he was in a Japanese internment camp, which I knew, but I never realized also my grandfather's brother, he used to be a pilot, and they were kind of badass if you hear the stories. But then I realized I didn't know very much about that part of my family history. The relationship with my dad wasn't very good ever since I was a child, so I never really had an interest. And I don't know, that somehow sparked me to ask more questions. Also because by that period, my dad was sick and he was getting older a lot, really fast. So with some, encouragement, I decided to ask my father for lunch so he could tell me a little bit more about his childhood, in part in Indonesia and part in Holland. And then I just went in open. And of course we started with a fight, because my dad and I always fight because we are very much alike, a little bit too much, a little bit stubborn. But and I was surprised to see that he brought a very old album with us, filled with pictures. So I just went in open to see what he had to tell. Okay, so this was the album that he brought, and right at the first, the first page are the newspaper clipping from my dad that he was born in Batavia, because when my dad was born, Indonesia was still a Dutch colony. It's now called Jakarta, but back then it was still called Batavia. And my dad was really proud of that it still had Batavia in his passport. But also a newspaper clipping that he graduated from high school. Back then in Holland, of course, they put everything like that in newspapers. And the engagement pictures of my grandparents, which says, Indonesia, Bandung, 31st of December 1941, and that they were engaged. And then the next pictures, they kinda, they surprised me, because it says married, but then in the picture it's only my grandmother. And this is Indonesia, Bandung, March 19th, 1942. And my dad explained that my grandfather was already in the internment camp. He was placed there by the Japanese. He basically saw his own wedding ceremony from behind the fence. And then the next pictures are when my dad was very little. 1947, so he was, I think, let's say around 1 year old. I don't know which month it is, but I think he was maybe a year, I think 10 months old, something like that. And I like this picture because it really, if you look at me and my pictures when I was around that age, we look very much alike. So yeah, he just took out the album and he talked me through it. He explained when he was born, they went back to Holland. My grandfather stayed in Indonesia. He lived in Holland for a while, then they went back to Indonesia. And later on, it turned out that they had to move back to Holland because my dad had some sort of jungle. I think it's some sort of an infection in his body, and the doctors basically said that if they would stay in the tropics in Indonesia, that the chance was very big that my dad might not make it. So that's why they decided to come back to Holland. When you would come from Indonesia, you would have the same status. The people would be living together for the first couple of months before they would like move to other places in Holland. And he told me for him it was fun. He was a child, all the mothers were together, all the children were playing the whole day, all the mothers were cooking Indonesian food, of course not realizing that he was basically in a sort of refugee camp. But it was very interesting to hear, and even the table behind us, there was a couple sitting there, and when they left, they talked to my dad and telling him that they overheard my dad telling me his history, and they thought it was very important for me that I hear that, and that they hoped that I would keep the memory alive of how it was in Holland back then. So that was very interesting. I didn't think a lot about it after that anymore. Of course, I looked at the album a couple times, basically thinking, we would come back to that later. But unfortunately, they had to stop my dad's treatment at the end of November, which moved things along very quickly and re-sparked my interest, because I realized I don't have much time left to ask my dad some questions. I was just wondering how my family ended up in Indonesia, and where did my Indonesian roots come from? Where did it start? So the first thing I did for my research, and I do that for most of my research, it's very basic. It's just filling in my last name as a search word in Google. So that's where I started, but the only problem is there is a soccer reporter here in Holland that has the same last name. So if you would only search for my last name, you would get a lot of his columns or interviews and everything else. But luckily, Google has a very nice operator where you can exclude certain words from your results. So by using the minus sign in front of his last name, I could tell Google I want to have results with the name Mossou, but I want you to exclude every result that also contains the word shirt. I went to the Dutch National Archive. They have a website, and I filled in my last name there, and it turned out that they still had my grandfather's internment camp cards, but they're extremely high quality. I was really surprised how high the quality was. By the time my grandfather was put in the internment camp, his father already passed. His mother was still alive, and even her information, her name, her last name, was on the card, and it is readable. My grandfather, because he was still part Dutch, he was part of the Royal Dutch East Indies Army. He was a mechanic. He never saw any battle in Indonesia, but because he was part of that army, the Japanese put him in the internment camp in Bandung, Indonesia. So yeah, he had to stay there for a while, and that's why he wasn't allowed to be part of his own wedding ceremony. But my brother later on told me that my grandfather was in the camp, and they were treated very badly by the Japanese. So at one point, my grandfather was really sick, and the Japanese decided to move, because it was a labor camp, to move most of the men on a ship, I think to Burma, but I'm not 100% sure. And my grandfather just really wanted to go with his friends, but he was too sick. So the Japanese saw him as a waste of resources, and they literally had to beat him off the ship because he was so determined to go. He missed the ship, of course, because they literally beat him off it. And then later on, it turned out that the ship was hit by a torpedo. And most of his friends, they drowned. So my grandfather was really lucky that he survived, even though I can understand it didn't feel that way for him. But yeah, that's why the Dutch government has those records, because he basically was part of the Dutch army, but in Indonesia. So some of the websites that I used are, MyHeritage. Even though it is a paid website, they give you a little bit of information because they want you to get curious and then pay for more information. So I did get some information off of that. You also have familysearch.org. You have genealogyonline.nl and Geneanet. Yeah, those are two websites I used that were Dutch. MyHeritage is international. So that's a website that you can use. I think it's different per country. So of course I did most of my research in Holland, but there are a lot of countries that have records like this, that have websites like this. And one thing I can really recommend is go and see if your country has a database of newspapers, because especially back in the days, a lot was recorded in newspapers. So I went to a Dutch website where I started searching for my family's name, and their website, they have so many newspapers, and it goes way back. So the Dutch website is called Delver, but it's such a powerful resource if you're doing research into family history. I was really surprised about Delver, and also because their search functions within the website is really good. Some websites have a very annoying search function. It's not intuitive, or you struggle with it. So I would recommend that you use Google together with a site operator to see if there's information available. And you can do that for newspaper websites, but you can also do it for MyHeritage, or of course any other websites that you want to use. So what you could do is, for instance, I found newspapers.com. So just fill in your last name, and then you do site:/newspapers.com. And that way you tell Google that you want to search for your last name or any other keyword, and you only want to search it on that website. So that's a way to quickly find out if a website might have information about you, and especially if a website has a search function that's just not intuitive. If you pivot from website to website, there was a lot of information that you could find. So I started out very basic with a pen and paper and just writing down the names I saw. But at some point, the family tree just became way too big, and I got confused. So I decided to use an open source program called YAD to make my own family tree. It's not specific for family trees, but you can make your own charts. You have the basic icons, So I used icons for male and female, and then you can add a label where I added the names. And then it's very simple. You can move them around. You can make it as big as you want. So if it turns out that there are 50 cousins to one side, it's no problem. You can just add them. And you can put lines in between them to make sure you know, okay, this person is married to that person and these are the children that came from that marriage. But for instance, if I wanted to know if somebody was born in Holland or in Indonesia, I would just add a little Indonesian or a Dutch flag. And later on, I found a lot of information about my family, also some very old pictures. And I just took a picture of that picture and I just put it in the family tree. So it's also very easy to grab images from the internet or your own pictures and add that to the chart you're making. The program is free. It's open source, and I use it a lot for my research. So of course, if you have a more common last name, it's more work to verify the information that you found. And I have to be honest, sometimes it's just not possible to only verify it using open source. Sometimes you have to go to an archive. But the funny thing is, we say it in our trainings a lot, like people who work at the archives, people who are librarians, they are basically the first open source investigators. The way that they can do his research into your genealogy, it's amazing. But of course you have to work back. So you know your own name, date of birth. Hopefully you know your parents' one, you know your grandparents' one. And that's how you try to trace back your steps. Of course you have to talk to your family to see if you can find out more names. Maybe somebody remembers the name of an aunt or an uncle, which you can use to verify. And sometimes you end up following a family line that didn't connect with yours. Unfortunately, the end of January, my dad passed away, and after that, me and my brother had to spend a lot of time in his house. We had to go through stuff, clear it. So what happened to me is my father started living there right after my grandparents died. So it was the house that he grew up in. So while we were cleaning out the house, we found a lot of stuff that still belonged to my grandparents that my dad never cleaned out. And I found a lot of letters and very old pictures of people that were interested in doing the same thing as I'm doing now, finding out the family line, but they didn't have internet back then. So I found letters from America coming to my grandparents. I found the first letter which said, hey, we're reaching out to every person in Holland that has the surname Mossou. We're trying to build a family tree, so would you be comfortable with sharing your name, the names of your children? Are they married? Do they have children? Do you have date of birth for us? Do you have pictures for us? So basically what I'm doing now with 1 or 2 mouse clicks, which literally takes me, 2 minutes, that would have taken them months. I was lucky. I could verify also the information that I found online with the papers that I found in my grandfather's house, but it turned out that basically 90% of the research that I've done was correct. The cool thing is that I found very old pictures. Not only did I find pictures of my grandfather's grandfather, but also his father-in-law, if you can still follow. And those are people that died around 1870, so before the 1900s, and I found their pictures. So it's really cool to see actually where I come from. And then if you start comparing pictures of my grandparents when they were younger, my dad when he was younger, that there is so much more resemblance than you realize physically. So yeah, that was really special finding that information, but I'm just so amazed with how much time and effort research took, and how luckily how fast and easy it is now. It's really, I think, unique. I still have these pictures. So what my grandmother did is, this is a picture of relatives, far relatives. But you want to know who is. So what she did is she took special paper and drew the outlines of their. So then you have the outlines. She numbered the outlines and then she wrote down who is who. But yeah, they loved it, and apparently looking at all the letters that they have, is my last name originates from Belgium, France, and then traveled up to Holland. From Holland they traveled to Indonesia. From Indonesia they ended up back in Holland, and we're the only ones that live in this area. Her name is Ketil Magal, and I already came across that name on one of the websites. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was true, but then I found this picture with her name and her information in my grandparents' belongings. So that way I could not only verify that the information was correct that somebody found, but also that there is a picture available of her and also of her husband. And I think what's important to keep in mind with research like this is it takes a long time. But that's okay. The information is out there. It's a big puzzle. So it takes time to puzzle it all together, and making a mind map or a family tree like I did really helps to see where there are still blank spots, or what kind of information you might want to find out. So it's interesting to find my grandparents' belongings, because for me it was a validation that the research I did online was correct and I was looking at the right people. So next steps now for me, I think, would be maybe reaching out to people who made other family trees, but also making sure that the pictures that I have here, which are really old, are somehow preserved and shared with them as well. Because it's, I don't know, I feel a little bit responsible. It's the last pieces of information maybe people might need, or the last thing that I can do for my family and my family line and my heritage. So yeah, I feel a little bit responsible for it. It's been a difficult journey, but it also gives me it helps me with my grief. I think that's the best way to put it. So in the end, to do this research, it cost me nothing. The websites that I used were free. And yeah, just pivoting from website to website, using Google operators is a smart way to find little bits of information, because you can also use Google operators to find certain parts of paid websites like MyHeritage. So my advice would be, if you start doing this research, is take your time. There's a lot of information that you can find out there. Some information will make sense to you right away. Other information will fill in some blanks later on, because it turns out that that person is related to you, but you just didn't realize where they fit in the family tree. And making a mind map or a family tree by myself. Of course, I knew that there were family trees already out there, but making it myself, gathering the information and placing it in the right part of the family tree, it helped me to untangle all the information that I had in my head and just to make sense of it. and also to see where the blank spots are. Which information do I still need? What do I need to verify? And that gives you some sense of direction, which sources you could use to verify it.